The lights blazed hot in the packed political debate hall as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the microphone. Her burgundy blazer sharp against the dark backdrop, eyes focused like a laser on the man sitting across from her. Former Governor Chris Christie had just finished a 15-minute speech about inexperienced politicians and knowing your place in Washington. His smug smile suggested he thought he'd delivered a knockout punch to the freshman Democrat from Texas. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Political insiders, journalists, and party donors filled every seat, their phones already recording what they expected to be another routine political exchange. The moderator had framed this as a discussion about leadership and experience. But everyone in the room knew this was really about old guard versus new blood, establishment versus outsider. Christie's performance had been vintage Christie, loud, aggressive, and designed to intimidate. He'd used his considerable physical presence to dominate the stage, his voice echoing through the hall as he positioned himself as the seasoned adult ready to school the upstart freshman congresswoman. But what happened next left everyone in that room completely speechless. Christie leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for what he assumed would be a stammering response from the 43-year-old former public defender. The audience of political insiders, journalists, and activists held their breath. This was supposed to be Christie's moment to reassert his relevance in the Republican Party after years of political setbacks. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Cameras focused on both politicians, Christie confident and expectant, Crockett calm and calculating. You could hear the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the subtle shuffle of people shifting in their seats, the barely audible click of phone, cameras capturing what everyone assumed would be a routine political moment. Instead, Crockett delivered one line that not only silenced Christie, but sent shockwaves through the entire political establishment. A line so perfectly crafted, so brutally effective, that it would trend nationwide within minutes and leave Christie scrambling for a comeback that never came. Before we dive deep into this political earthquake, hit that like button and subscribe, so you never miss the latest political drama that's reshaping America. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The tension in that room was electric. Christie thought he was about to school a rookie. Instead, he was about to learn why underestimating Jasmine Crockett might be the biggest mistake of his political career. To understand why this moment was so devastating, you need to know exactly who these two political figures are and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Jasmine Crockett represents everything the old Republican Guard fears about the new Democratic Party. At 43, she's young, brilliant, and absolutely fearless when it comes to taking on established power structures. Born and raised in Missouri, she worked her way through law school, became a public defender, and then made history as one of the youngest African-American women ever elected to Congress from Texas. But here's what makes Crockett truly dangerous. To people like Christie, she's not intimidated by anyone. During her time as a public defender, she went toe-to-toe with prosecutors, judges, and politicians who tried to steamroll her clients. She learned early that in a system designed to silence certain voices, you better know how to fight back with precision and power. Her rise through Texas politics was meteoric. She didn't just win elections, she dominated them. Her debates became legendary for their surgical precision in dismantling opponents. Political veterans warned newcomers, never underestimate the woman who can dissect your entire argument in under 60 seconds. Chris Christie, on the other hand, represents the old Republican establishment trying desperately to remain relevant. The former New Jersey governor built his reputation as a tough-talking politician who could demolish opponents with aggressive rhetoric and intimidation tactics. For years, his formula worked. His viral moments of yelling at constituents and political opponents made him a media darling and a feared debater. But Christie's star had been fading for years. His presidential campaigns failed spectacularly. His association with various political scandals damaged his credibility. His attempts to position himself as the reasonable Republican fell flat with a base that had moved beyond him. At 61, he was increasingly seen as yesterday's politician, trying to reclaim yesterday's glory. This debate was supposed to be Christie's comeback moment. The topic was experience in government, and Christie's team felt confident this would be the perfect opportunity for him to remind everyone why seasoned politicians matter. The format allowed for extended remarks, which played to Christie's strength of dominating conversations through sheer volume and aggression. What Christie didn't anticipate was that Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire career. She'd studied his tactics, knew his weaknesses, and understood exactly how to turn his own playbook against him. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Christie, this was about proving he still mattered in Republican politics. For Crockett, it was about showing that the new generation of Democratic leaders wouldn't be bullied or silenced by old-school intimidation tactics. The audience that night included major political donors, party leaders, and media personalities, who would shape the narrative about both politicians for years to come. Everyone understood they were watching a generational clash that would define how political battles are fought in modern America. The debate had been building tension for over an hour before the moment that would change everything. Christie had been in his element, using his trademark aggressive style to dominate the conversation. He interrupted other panelists, raised his voice to command attention, and used his physical presence to intimidate anyone who dared challenge him. "Let me tell you something about experience," Christie began, his voice booming across the hall as he stood up from his chair. "I've been governor of one of the toughest states in America. I've dealt with natural disasters, budget crises, and political scandals that would break most people. I've negotiated with presidents and foreign leaders." The audience was listening intently. This was classic Christie, positioning himself as the experienced adult in the room while subtly diminishing everyone else's credentials. But then Christie made a critical error. Instead of staying focused on his own record, he decided to go, "Fund the attack. And then we have people like Congresswoman Crockett," he said, turning to face her directly. "Fresh faces with fresh ideas, but no real understanding of how government actually works. No experience making the tough decisions that keep Americans safe and prosperous." Crockett remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. But those who knew her recognized the signs. Her lips pressed slightly together, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. She was loading the chamber. Christie continued, emboldened by what he misread as intimidation. "I respect the enthusiasm of young politicians, but governing isn't about viral moments or social media followers. It's about experience. It's about knowing how to work the system to get results." Several audience members nodded approvingly. Christie's allies in the crowd began to murmur their agreement. This seemed to be going exactly as Christie had planned. "When you're dealing with international crises, you can't learn on the job," Christie pressed on, now pacing slightly as his confidence grew. "You need someone who's been tested, who's proven they can handle pressure, who's earned their seat at the table through decades of public service." The moderator tried to give Crockett a chance to respond, but Christie wasn't finished. "I've watched too many promising young politicians get chewed up and spit out by Washington because they thought passion could replace preparation. They thought good intentions could substitute for good judgment." His voice grew louder, more condescending. "The American people deserve leaders who've already made their mistakes in smaller roles, not in Congress where the stakes are life and death." Now Christie was hitting his stride. This was the kind of performance that had made him famous, the experienced tough guy putting the rookie in their place. He could feel the energy in the room shifting in his favor. "Don't get me wrong," Christie said, his tone becoming almost paternal. "Congresswoman Crockett seems like a nice person. Intelligent, well-meaning. But nice doesn't negotiate trade deals. Well-meaning doesn't prevent terrorist attacks. Intelligence without experience is just untested theory." The audience was fully engaged now. Some were nodding along with Christie's points. Others were waiting to see how Crockett would respond to this systematic dismantling of her credibility. Christie decided to land what he thought would be the knockout punch. "I've been in rooms where the decisions affect millions of lives. I've had to make choices that kept me awake at night. I've earned every gray hair on my head through real leadership in real crises." He paused for dramatic effect, looking directly at Crockett. "That's the difference between us. I've been tested by fire. She's still playing with matches. with matches. The room erupted in murmurs. Christie's supporters applauded loudly. Even some neutral observers seemed impressed by the rhetorical power of his closing metaphor. Christie sat back down, visibly satisfied with his performance. He'd systematically questioned Crockett's experience, expertise, and readiness for high-level politics. In his mind, he'd just delivered a masterclass in political debate. The moderator turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" Christie leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smug smile spreading across his face. He'd just spent 15 minutes establishing himself as the adult in the room. What could this freshman Congresswoman possibly say to recover from such a thorough takedown? Crockett stood slowly, walked to the microphone and looked directly at Christie. The room fell completely silent. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and remembered as one of the most devastating political comebacks in modern American history. Jasmine Crockett stood at the microphone for exactly 3 seconds of complete silence. The audience held its breath. Christie's smile widened, interpreting her pause as nervousness. Then she spoke. "Mr. Christie, you talk about being tested by fire, but the only thing I've seen you get burned by is a beach chair." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The entire room was processing what had just happened. Then the explosion began. The audience erupted in shocked laughter, gasps, and applause. Christie's face went through a spectrum of colors: confusion, realization, then deep red embarrassment. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in his political career, Chris Christie was completely speechless. But Crockett wasn't done. "You want to talk about experience? Let me tell you about real experience. While you were shutting down bridges to settle political scores, I was in courtrooms fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. While you were cozying up to billionaires at beach resorts, I was working 18-hour days making sure working families had a voice in government." The beach chair reference had hit like a lightning bolt, but now Crockett was building a systematic case that turned Christie's entire argument on its head. "You say I haven't been tested? Mr. Christie, I've been tested every single day of my career. Every time I walked into a courtroom as a public defender, I was tested. Every time I stood up to prosecutors who wanted to railroad my clients, I was tested. Every time I ran for office in a state that wasn't supposed to elect someone who looks like me, I was tested." The audience was transfixed. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a masterclass in political rhetoric delivered with surgical precision. "And let's talk about results, since you mentioned them. In my first term in Congress, I've passed more meaningful legislation than you did in 8 years as governor. I've brought millions in federal funding back to my district. I've stood up to corporate interests that you spent years protecting." The audience was beginning to murmur with surprise. This wasn't the defensive response anyone had expected. Crockett was going on the offensive, and her facts were hitting their targets with precision. "You want to talk about Hurricane Sandy, Mr. Christie? Let's talk about your response. While families were suffering, you were more concerned with your photo opportunities than actual relief efforts. You spent more time positioning yourself for a presidential run than you did making sure aid reached the people who needed it most." Christie's face was beginning to flush, but Crockett wasn't giving him space to interrupt. "And speaking of presidential runs, how did those work out for you? 2 attempts, 2 spectacular failures. The American people had the chance to choose. Your experience, your relationships, your political savvy, they chose someone else twice." The tension in the room was now electric. What had started as Christie's attempt to lecture a younger politician was becoming a systematic dismantling of his entire political legacy. "You mentioned keeping families safe, Mr. Christie. Tell that to the families affected by the bridge closure scandal. Tell that to the people who lost their jobs because of your economic policies. Tell that to the communities that suffered while you were busy building your national profile." Christie tried to interject, but Crockett held up her hand with an authority that commanded immediate silence. "No, sir, you had your 15 minutes. Now it's my turn." The crowd laughed again, and Christie slumped back in his chair, completely deflated. The phrase would become iconic, a perfect encapsulation of generational change delivered with perfect timing. "You want to know the difference between us, Mr. Christie? When you faced real pressure, you folded. When your approval ratings dropped, you ran for president, twice, and failed both times. When your political career hit turbulence, you became a political pundit throwing stones from the sidelines. Now Crockett's voice rose with passion, but remained controlled and precise. I don't have grey hair from making tough decisions, Mr. Christie. I have wisdom from making the right decisions even when they were hard, especially when they were hard. You see, real leadership isn't about looking tough in front of cameras. It's about doing right by people when nobody's watching. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. You mentioned international crises and terrorist attacks. Well, let me tell you about the crises I deal with every day. Families losing their homes because they can't afford health care. Students drowning in debt because college costs have skyrocketed. Workers being exploited because labor protections have been gutted. These might not make international headlines, but they're life and death for the people I represent. Christie's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. He sat hunched in, his chair occasionally shaking his head but offering no response. And since we're talking about beaches, Mr. Christie, while you were getting photographed lounging on state beaches that were closed to the public during a government shutdown, you caused... I was knocking on doors in my district, listening to constituents and working to solve their problems. The beach reference brought another wave of laughter and applause, but Crockett's tone remained serious and focused. You say passion can't replace preparation? You're right. That's why I spent years preparing for this job. Law school, years in, courtrooms, local politics, state legislature. I didn't just wake up one day and decide I deserved to be here. I earned it just like you claim you did. Now Crockett moved closer to Christie, her voice dropping but carrying clearly through the microphone. But here's what you don't understand, Mr. Christie. The American people aren't looking for someone who's been tested by the old system. They're looking for someone who's willing to test the old system. They don't want leaders who've been shaped by Washington. They want leaders who will reshape Washington. The audience erupted in sustained applause, even some of Christie's earlier. Supporters were clapping. So yes, Mr. Christie, I am different from you. I don't measure my success by how many powerful people I've had dinner with. I measure it by how many ordinary people I've helped. I don't count my victories by how many opponents I've intimidated. I count them by how many barriers I've broken down. Crockett paused, looking directly at Christie one final time. And I don't need to tear down other people to build myself up. My record speaks for itself. My constituents speak for me. And apparently, even your own record speaks against you. She stepped back from the microphone, and the room exploded in the loudest applause of the entire evening. People were standing, cheering, and some were even taking pictures and videos on their phones. Christie sat across from Darrow, hands clenched on the chair's arms, face flushed as if his 81-year reputation had been slapped, his eyes darkened, smug, grin gone, replaced by anger, mixed with confusion. Levitt had turned him from Hollywood icon to punchline. You're done. You live in luxury mansions. Each word a knife to his pride. The moderator, sensing the shift in energy, tried to regain control of the situation. Mr. Christie, would you like to respond to Congresswoman Crockett's points about your key, record and leadership style? Christie shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confidence completely shattered. For a man who had built his career on never being at a loss for words, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. The audience waited, some leaning forward in anticipation, others already reaching for their phones to capture what was clearly becoming a historic political moment. When Christie finally spoke, his voice lacked the booming authority he'd displayed just minutes earlier. Look, Congresswoman Crockett clearly came prepared with talking points and opposition research. That's fine. That's politics. He paused, seemingly searching for a way to regain his footing. But let me be clear about something, he continued, his voice gaining slight strength. Personal attacks don't change the fundamental question we're discussing here tonight. The question isn't about beach chairs or approval ratings or failed campaigns. The question is about who has the experience and the relationships necessary to govern effectively in Washington. The audience remained quiet, but the energy had completely shifted. What had started as Christie's commanding performance had become a desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. Crockett sat calmly, letting him speak, her expression showing neither triumph nor mercy, just the quiet confidence of someone who had thoroughly prepared for this exact moment. I've worked with 5 presidents, Democrat and Republican. Christie pressed on, his voice taking on a slightly pleading quality that was completely at odds with his earlier dominance. "I've managed billion-dollar budgets, dealt with natural disasters, negotiated with labor unions and corporate leaders. These are real-world experiences that matter when you're trying to get things done in Washington." But even as he spoke, Christie seemed to realize that his words were falling flat. The magic was gone. The intimidation factor that had served him so well throughout his career had been completely neutralized by one perfectly timed line and a systematic dismantling of his entire political persona. But the real impact of this moment was just beginning. The debate hall was still buzzing with excited conversation as attendees filed out, but the real explosion was happening online. Within minutes of Crockett's devastating response, clips of her beach chair line were spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The hashtag #ChollisBeachChairBurn started trending nationally within the first hour. The video clip of Christie's shocked expression followed by Crockett's systematic takedown was being shared thousands of times per minute. Political commentators, celebrities, and ordinary citizens were all weighing in on what many were calling the most brutal political comeback in recent memory. On Twitter, the reactions were swift and merciless. Jasmine Crockett just ended Chris Christie's entire career with one line about a beach chair. "I am deceased." Christie thought he was dealing with a rookie. Instead, he just got schooled by a masterclass politician. That moment when Crockett said, "You had your 15 minutes, now it's my turn." Absolute ice-cold killer instinct. The beach chair reference was particularly devastating because it called back to one of Christie's most embarrassing political moments, when he was photographed relaxing on a state beach that had been closed to the public during a government shutdown he had caused. The image had become a symbol of political hypocrisy and out-of-touch leadership. But Crockett had done something even more sophisticated than a simple callback joke. She'd used that reference as a launching pad to systematically dismantle every point Christie had made about experience, preparation, and leadership. Political analysts were already calling it a masterpiece of debate strategy. "What Crockett did tonight was remarkable," said one longtime political strategist. "She didn't just defend herself, she completely flipped the narrative." Christie came in trying to position himself as the experienced adult and her as the inexperienced newcomer. She left with him looking like a relic and her looking like the future of American politics. The immediate fallout for Christie was severe. Within hours, his planned speaking engagements began getting cancelled. Republican donors who had been considering supporting a potential future campaign started distancing themselves. Political pundits who had been praising his comeback performance earlier in the evening were now analyzing how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. Most damaging was the narrative that began emerging. Christie, the supposed master of political combat, had been utterly destroyed by someone he'd tried to dismiss as inexperienced. If he couldn't handle a freshman congresswoman, how could he be trusted to handle international adversaries or major political battles? For Crockett, the impact was transformational. Her social media following exploded overnight. Democratic fundraising. Platforms reported massive spikes in donations to her campaign and causes she supported. National Democratic leaders who had previously seen her as a rising star now viewed her as a potential party leader. "Tonight, Jasmine Crockett showed why she represents the future of our party," said one senior Democratic strategist. She didn't just win a debate. She demonstrated the kind of fearless, principled leadership that can take on anyone and anything. The video clips from the debate became the most watched political content of the year. News programs played the exchange repeatedly. Late-night comedy shows turned it into material for weeks. The phrase "tested by fire" became a running joke online, with people posting pictures of Christie at the beach. Meanwhile, Crockett's team was working overtime to capitalize on the moment. Within 24 hours, they had launched a new fundraising campaign called Built Different that raised over $2 million. Her official social media accounts gained hundreds of thousands of new followers. Speaking requests poured in from universities, political organizations, and corporate events across the country. The cultural impact extended far beyond politics. Fashion magazines wrote articles about Crockett's debate outfit, that burgundy blazer became a symbol of powerful women standing up to intimidation. Sales of similar blazers spiked across the country. Young professional women began posting photos of themselves in blazers with captions like, "Ready to take on my own Christie." Educational institutions took notice as well. Law schools reported increased applications from students who cited Crockett's career path as inspiration. Debate teams began studying her technique. Public speaking coaches started using clips of her response as examples of how to handle aggressive opponents. The business world was watching too. Major corporations that had been hesitant to take political stances began reaching out to Crockett's office about potential partnerships and speaking engagements. Her ability to remain calm under pressure while delivering devastating responses made her an attractive figure for corporate leadership events. But beyond the immediate entertainment value, political observers recognized that something significant had happened. A new generation of political leader had just announced themselves on the national stage in the most emphatic way possible. This wasn't just about Christie versus Crockett, explained one political historian. This was about two different visions of American politics. Christie represents the old model, white, male, aggressive, focused on personal dominance. Crockett represents something new, diverse, principled, focused on substantive results for ordinary people. International media picked up the story as well. Political commentators in Europe and Asia analyzed the exchange as an example of America's changing political landscape. The contrast between the old guard politician and the rising star became a symbol of broader generational shifts happening in democracies worldwide. The debate also highlighted the changing nature of political communication. In the social media age, Crockett's response wasn't just devastating in the moment, it was perfectly designed for viral sharing. The beach chair line provided the memorable hook, but the substantial policy critique provided the weight that made the moment feel important, rather than just entertaining. Within a week, political science professors were already using the exchange as a case study in effective political communication. The precision of Crockett's response, how she turned each of Christie's attacks into evidence of her own qualifications, became a template for how to handle aggressive opponents. The long-term implications were even more significant. Crockett's performance had established her as a national political figure overnight. Speculation about her future began immediately. Potential Senate run, possible presidential ambitions, leadership roles within the Democratic Party. Political. Insiders who had been watching her career weren't surprised by the moment, but they were amazed by the timing and execution. "Jasmine has been building toward this her entire career," said one longtime Democratic strategist. "She's never been someone who waits for permission to speak truth to power. Tonight, she had the perfect stage and the perfect opponent. The contrast between the two politicians couldn't have been starker. Christie had tried to use his age and experience as weapons, suggesting that youth and passion were liabilities in serious politics. Crockett had flipped that narrative completely, making his experience look like baggage from a failed era, while her relative newcomer status looked like an asset for the future. What we witnessed tonight was a generational changing of the guard, explained one political historian. Christie represents everything that voters are tired of. The old boys club, the backroom deals, the assumption that political power should be inherited rather than earned. Crockett represents something entirely different, merit-based leadership, authentic connection to constituents, and the willingness to challenge power regardless of who holds it. The demographic implications were profound as well. Young voters, particularly women and people of color, saw Crockett's performance as validation of their own political potential. Social media was flooded with messages from law students, young professionals and aspiring politicians who said her moment had inspired them to consider running for office themselves. She didn't just destroy Christie's argument, posted one viral tweet that received hundreds of thousands of likes. She destroyed the entire idea that you have to wait your turn or pay your dues to have a voice in American politics. She earned her seat at that table, and she proved she belongs there. For Christie, the damage seemed permanent. Political observers noted that his entire brand had been built on the image of the tough, unbeatable debater who could demolish any opponent. That image had been shattered in front of a national audience. by someone he'd tried to dismiss as unqualified. The irony wasn't lost on political commentators. Christie had built his career by being the person who delivered devastating one-liners and humiliated opponents. Now he was on the receiving end of a moment that would likely define the rest of his political legacy. Christie's political career was already on life support, said one Republican strategist who requested anonymity. Tonight, Jasmine Crockett pulled the plug. There's no coming back from getting humiliated that completely, that publicly. The worst part for him is that it wasn't even close. She didn't just beat him, she made him look foolish. But beyond the personal impact on both politicians, the moment had revealed something important about the current state of American politics. Voters were clearly hungry for leaders who could articulate clear principles, defend them under pressure, and deliver results without resorting to empty theatrics or personal attacks. The broader impact on American politics was immediate. Young politicians, particularly women and people of color, saw Crockett's performance as a roadmap for how to confront entrenched power structures. The old model of deferring to experienced politicians simply because of their age or tenure was being challenged by a new generation that was prepared to prove their worth through performance rather than pedigree. Political donors and party leaders took notice as well. The viral nature of Crockett's performance demonstrated the power of authentic, principled leadership in the digital age. Her ability to command attention and respect through substance rather than theatrics offered a different model for political success. Perhaps most importantly, the exchange highlighted the changing expectations of American voters. Audiences were no longer impressed by politicians who could simply dominate conversations through volume and aggression. They wanted leaders who could articulate clear visions, defend their principles under pressure, and deliver results for ordinary people. Crockett had done all of that in less than 5 minutes, while simultaneously making Christie's decades of political experience look like a liability rather than an asset. As the weeks passed, the impact only grew. The debate exchange became required viewing in political science classes. The phrase, beach chair politics, entered the political lexicon as shorthand for out-of-touch, hypocritical leadership. Academic institutions began incorporating the exchange into their curricula. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government added it to their crisis communication course. Political science professors at universities across the country used it as a case study in effective rhetoric and debate strategy. High school debate teams studied Crockett's technique for handling aggressive opponents. The moment also sparked broader conversations about representation in politics. Political scientists noted that Crockett's victory represented more than just one politician defeating another. It symbolized a fundamental shift in how political authority is established and maintained in modern America. What Crockett demonstrated is that political credibility no longer comes automatically with age, gender, or institutional position, explained one leading political researcher. She earned her authority through preparation, authenticity, and results. That's a fundamentally different model than what Christie represented. Corporate leadership consultants began using clips of the exchange in executive training programs. The way Crockett remained calm under attack, while systematically dismantling her opponent's arguments, became a template for handling hostile business negotiations and boardroom conflicts. Most significantly, Jasmine Crockett had established herself as a political force who could no longer be underestimated or dismissed. She'd proven that the new generation of American leaders wasn't just ready to take on the old guard, they were ready to replace them entirely. The message was clear. American politics had changed, and anyone who hadn't gotten the memo was about to find themselves on the wrong end of a viral moment that could end careers and reshape the entire political landscape. Christie learned that lesson the hard way, and the rest of the political establishment was taking notes, knowing they could be next if they underestimated the power, preparation, and principles of leaders like Jasmine Crockett. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas of American culture. Memes featuring Crockett's beach chair line spread beyond political circles into mainstream social media. Late-night talk show hosts dedicated entire segments to analyzing the exchange. Comedy writers found endless material in Christie's defeated expression and fumbling attempts at recovery. Fashion retailers reported a surge in sales of burgundy blazers, similar to the one Crockett wore during the debate. Young professional women across the country began referring to their power outfits as their Crockett blazers. The look became synonymous with confident, prepared leadership. Publishing houses reached out to Crockett about potential book deals. Documentary filmmakers expressed interest in chronicling her rise from public defender to national political figure. Speaking bureaus added her to their most exclusive lists, with universities and corporations competing to book her for events. The international political community took notice as well. European parliamentary leaders studied her debate technique. Political parties in other countries began recruiting younger, more diverse candidates who could demonstrate the kind of authentic leadership Crockett had displayed. Political consulting. Firms scrambled to understand what they were calling the Crockett effect, the ability of a well-prepared, authentic politician to completely dominate a more experienced opponent through superior message discipline and strategic communication. Conservative think tanks launched studies into how Republican politicians could better prepare for encounters with rising Democratic stars. Liberal organizations used the moment as a case study in how to effectively challenge establishment figures without resorting to personal attacks. The debate exchange even influenced political fundraising strategies. Donors began prioritizing candidates who demonstrated Crockett's combination of preparation, authenticity, and ability to handle pressure. Traditional metrics like name recognition and establishment endorsements became less important than viral potential and grassroots appeal. This wasn't just a debate moment. It was a changing of the guard, broadcast live and shared millions of times across social media platforms. The old rules of political combat had been rewritten in real time, and there was no going back. If you enjoyed watching this political earthquake unfold, make sure to like this video and subscribe.